Today, let's make the cutest 18-inch doll skirt. Welcome, I do sewing and DIY related content, and today we are going to be making this really cute angled hem skirt for an 18-inch doll. So first, you're going to need some sort of fabric. For the amount of fabric, if you are buying new, this could definitely be maybe like a fat quarter. That would be more than enough. Or this will be a great scrap project since, as you can tell, it doesn't use too much fabric. So either way you go, it's not too much fabric, so it's a very quick and easy project to do. After you have your fabric, you are going to want some elastic. So I'm going to be using 1/4 inch thick elastic. You can get this off Amazon, any fabric store, Walmart, stores like that will have it. Then you're going to want some pins, including a safety pin, as this will be helping us when we are guiding our elastic through the casing for the skirt. So making sure you have your pins as safety pins. You could also use quilting clips if you're more comfortable with those. Then you're going to want some scissors. So you want your regular fabric shears, and then we are going to be finishing off our edges. So if you have pinking shears, you could use that. I will be showing you another way that you can finish off your edges without a serger or without pinking shears, but if you have those on hand, it may be quicker. Then you're going to want the pattern piece. So I got this pattern piece. This is available on my Etsy store. Check the link in the description. And if you use code SKIRT2023, you can get 30% off your order when you buy this pattern. All the details will be written up there as well. So once you have gathered all your supplies, it is now time for us to get started. So for the fabric, I said I was going to talk a little bit about different fabric types you could be using. For today's skirt, I'm going to be using a brocade, but you could definitely use like this, a cotton fabric, really any woven materials. You could also do stretch if you are familiar with how you sew a stretch fabric. Now, if you're like me and using a brocade, be careful as they are messy. So this would be the same with satin. They can easily spray, so you want to make sure you're finishing off your edges. And I'll be showing you that as we go through the pattern, some of the ways that you can do that. So first though, we need to cut out our pattern piece. So as you can see here, I have the pattern piece. There is a gauge on it. So when you print this out and you cut it out, be sure you double check that that 2 inches is lining up exactly with your 2 inches so that all the measurements are correct. Next, to cut out our pattern piece, we are going to be cutting out our fabric on the fold. And what that means is you're going to take your fabric and you are going to fold it. So you can see on that left hand side, I have the fabric piece, and then my pattern, it says cut on fold. So on that edge, I am placing the cut on fold part of my pattern piece on the fold of my fabric. And then I'm going to pin this into place. So I am not going to be cutting that edge itself. I'm just going to be cutting those 3 other edges. And then this is going to give me one long piece. So I'm putting pins in those 4 pieces. You can see those 4 corners. And then I have my fold here, fabric, which again, we are not going to be cutting that. And now I'm just going to cut out the other 3 edges. Now, absolute worst case scenario, if you did accidentally cut that edge, no problem, you would just have to sew it up as an additional step. So if it does happen, it's not the end of the world, you can fix it, but most likely you do not want to do that. You just want to cut out these 3 edges, and then this is going to give you your pattern piece. And what you're going to do now is we're going to unpin it. You can see that we have our fabric here, and then when I open it up, we have one bigger piece of fabric. So now that we have our skirt piece, it is now time for us to start prepping our edges. And the first edge we are going to deal with is that top long edge. So this is actually where our waistband is going to be going. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be folding over that fabric a 1/4 inch, and then we're going to be, you could press this down if you want to, but you're going to put pins, and we're just going to be taking a long seam all the way across. So as you can see, I am using my self-healing mat on the back since it has a ruler on it to see what a 1/4 inch is. I'm going to fold over my fabric, so as you can see, I'm bringing that right side of the fabric towards the wrong side, and then I'm just going to pin this into place, and I'm going to continue this all the way along that skirt. And what this is going to do is it's going to allow us to have a nice clean finish, as then we're going to be folding this over one more time a little later on to give us our elastic casing. So this way we don't have to worry about any fraying that's going to occur later, and it'll give us a nice clean and neat look. So now I'm just going to go through and I'm going to pin this so that that little 1/4 inch can be sewn across. Now you could use pins, you could use quilting clips, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. The main point is that you just want to make sure that this stays nice and even and is a 1/4 inch all the way through so that we are able to take that nice straight seam all the way across. Now at my sewing machine, I am keeping this set at the straight stitch, and then I'm just going to put my presser foot down and I'm going to begin sewing, getting as close as I can to the edge of the fabric. So this is probably taking about a little bit less than a 1/4 inch seam allowance. I'm just very carefully going to work my way through this. Be sure to backstitch at the beginning as well as the end, and then all the way through you're just going to very carefully sew this up. If you have your pins also horizontally, it will be very easy for you to just kind of pull them out as you go along. And that's what I did here. So I just took my time, went through and sewed the seam in place so that the waistband could be nice and neat, and this will allow us to have no raw edges for our waistband. Then as I got to the end here, you see that I did backstitch and then I took it off the sewing machine. So this is what the waistband currently looks like. What this is going to do now is we're going to be able to fold this over again, and we have all those nice raw edges are covered up and we won't be able to see them. Now before I do that though, I do want to finish the sides of the skirt, as there's really not going to be a way to cover them as in I was doing before. Now you have a couple different options here. You could do like a French seam if you wanted to. You'd have to make the pattern slightly bigger. What I'm going to do though is just take a zigzag stitch. So I have it on the edge of my fabric, and then here, so 4 is a zigzag stitch on my machine. So I'm going to set it to 4, and then what I'm going to do is just very carefully sew along the edge of my fabric so that the zigzag stitch is getting both the outside portion of the fabric as well as the inside portion. So this is just going to allow it to sort of hide some of those raw edges and give you a little bit more support and stability, especially when you're taking the skirt on and off and you're using a fabric that may fray. It's just going to hold everything in a little bit nicer for you. And I did this for both sides, so both of those short edges that are going to be the sides of our skirt, I did this for both of them so that they could both be sort of finished off and look nicer. So this is what the skirt currently looks like. You can see the top we have no raw edges, and then the sides I did that technique to help finish them off. You could also have definitely used your pinking shears if you had those. If you had a serger, you definitely could have used that. But I just wanted to show you a way where you didn't have to get any extra supplies to finish off the edges. So now what it's time to do is we are going to bring our skirt together. So bring both of those short edges together, and I'm going to take a seam right along the edge. So I'm just going to pin this up, that short edge up, and then we're going to take a straight stitch. And this is going to allow us to begin the process of really bringing our skirt together so that then we can take the hem at the bottom as well as taking the waistband at the top and adding the elastic. So you can go ahead and just add some pins. If you want to use quilting clips, you can definitely do that as well. And then just take a straight stitch. For this, I did about a 1/2 inch seam allowance, so it was slightly bigger, but just making sure that if you did finish it off using the zigzag stitch, that you are not sewing through that zigzag stitch. And then similar to all of our other stitches, be sure to backstitch at the beginning as well as the end so that you can hold that stitch in place. So here's what our skirt currently looks like. You can see we have that nice side seam, and then we also have the top. So now it is time for us to fold down this top so that we can actually put the waistband in. So as you saw there, I just kind of flipped the skirt under itself so that I have this nice waistband appearing, and then I'm going to pin this down so it is about 1/2 inch, so it's maybe a slightly bigger than 1/2 inch, but we can look at the board here and you can see when you measure it, it comes out to be exactly like 1/2 inch. And this is the size casing that we want for our elastic to go through, especially if you're using a 1/4 inch elastic. The 1/2 inch is going to be perfect. Now as you can see, when I did get to the seam, I opened the seam up to press it, and then I had it pinned down on either side. This way it just lays nicer and it's easier to put your elastic through. Now when you get to the end, so we need to leave a gap so we can get our elastic in there. So I marked this with 2 pins, and this will allow me to know where to start and then where to stop so that I make sure that I leave that opening for my elastic. So as you can see here, I'm taking about a 1/2 inch seam allowance. I need to make sure that I do have that seam allowance so I have some place for my elastic. And then I'm just using a straight stitch to sew all the way around and then leaving that gap for my little elastic casing so that I will have some place to put the waistband. So for this, since it is sewing on that curve, it's a little tighter, be sure to just take your time and don't rush through it. Also, as with all the stitches, be sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. So this is currently what our skirt looks like. So we have that little waistband. I did flip this right side out to see what it looked like on the outside, and looks really nice. Looks very nice and neat. So now I'm just going to take the time before I get too much further into this and trim up all the little extra threads that I had from using my sewing machine. So you can use your scissors, you could use little clippers, however you would like to do this. And now it's time to cut out our elastic. So we're going to want a 9-inch piece of elastic. Again, I used a 1/4 inch elastic, and then you're going to take your safety pin and you're going to pin this through one edge of your elastic. And we are then going to guide our elastic through that waistband we just created. So you'll have that little opening that you had, and then you're just going to push the safety pin through and then just guide your elastic through your waistband. And if you ever get to a point where as you're going through this, the elastic at the end is starting to slip out, you can definitely use a pin to hold that little piece of the elastic in place. So as you see here, I started to get to a point where the elastic was getting short, so I put that pin on it, and then I just continued all the way around. So here I have both ends of my elastic, and I am just going to pin these together so that I am able to sew them up. So I'm just taking a single pin and I'm just going to pin it through both pieces of elastic, and then I'm just going to take a straight seam multiple times across the elastic. So I do this about 5 or 6 times, so very similar to how I did in the scrunchie video if you saw that. And I'm just going to trim off that extra elastic and string. You could definitely have just gotten away with a 1/2 inch seam allowance there and been totally fine. Now I'm going to pin that little opening that I had for the waistband closed, and I'm just going to take a straight seam to connect both of those spots so that it is nice and closed, and then my waistband will be complete. So as you can see there, I'm just top stitching very closely where I had it before so that I could just finish off that seam, and then I back stitch both the beginning as well as the end so that it can be sewn off, and we have our waistband now done. So this is what the waistband looks like. It looks nice and neat and it's very cute. So I can go through now using my scissors and trim any extra little strings that are there. And now it is just time to focus on the bottom of our skirt. Now for the hem, I'm going to flip this back so that it's inside out, and I'm just going to do a very similar rolled hem as I did on the waistband. So flipping up all of this fabric about 1/4 inch, and then using my pins to hold that first raw edge in place. So I'm going to go all the way around. Now when you get down to the point, be sure that you fold over the point on one side, and then you're going to fold it over again on the other side so that that point comes through. And then very similar to how I did before, I opened up that seam so that I could then press it down, and then I'm just going to sew all of this. So I'm taking that nice 1/4 inch seam allowance, going all the way through my fabric so that I'm holding this raw edge in place. And then very similarly, what we're going to be doing is then folding this over again so that there's no raw edges. And this will just give us a very nice and clean finish so that we don't have to worry about it fraying at any point. So this is currently what it looks like. Now if you had a fabric that did not fray, you could definitely stop here, but I'm just going to trim off these extra little threads, and then I'm going to essentially fold all this over again, except this time different from our waistband. I'm only going to do it 1/4 inch, so we don't need to make a casing, we don't need to have anything be extra large. So I'm just going to do another 1/4 inch fold over, and then I'm going to pin this all the way around. And very similarly to before, you could definitely use pins, but if you have quilting clips, you could go ahead and use those as well at this point, whichever you're comfortable with, since this is a smaller seam. Once you have it all pinned up, you can now take it to your sewing machine. So you can see here that I am going to have it be as close to the edge as possible. So it's a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then I'm back stitching at both the front and the end. So this is what my skirt looks like. I'm just going to trim off these little threads, and then essentially it's done. We have finished our skirt. Now if you wanted to, you could always add a little decoration at the bottom. You could add a bow on it. There's multiple different ways that you could kind of make these look a little fancier if you so chose, but this is what the point looks like, and I think it's a really fun detail and touch. And then this is the finished skirt. So depending on what your fabric is, if you wanted to press this out, you could. I'm going to leave this exactly how it is though. And this is the completed skirt. So overall, it was only a few seams. We made sure that all of our edges were finished in some way, so you don't have to really worry about fraying or having to worry about it coming undone at any point. And this was a very simple and easy beginner project, as well as a scrap buster project depending on what fabric you used. So this is what it looks like on the doll. So it fits really nicely. It has that fun angled effect at the bottom, and then the waistband turned out really nicely too for it. If you would like to download the full instructions for yourself, be sure to check the link in my description box for the Etsy pattern. Use code SKIRT2023 to get 30% off your order. Let me know if you enjoyed this video. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks.